Hi, I'm Ken Adams, and welcome to this week's edition of the Valley View. And we've brought back Brian Hines to talk about goings-on down at City Hall.
Oh, yeah.
And we were at a meeting this last Monday when they discussed the proposed plan to convert the library into a police station. And the mayor took it off the table right away, but there was still quite a bit of talk about it. So, Brian, you were one of the ones that got up and spoke about the whole issue about doing this conversion. And there was a number of supporters of the library there. In fact, I think it was at least 2/3 to 3/4 of the people there were there as supporters of the library. So why don't you tell us you're kind of the one that broke this story, because the Statesman Journal wasn't really covering it that much.
No, they weren't. Yeah, I was at the work session. This was a city council meeting last Monday, and before that they held a work session, which is like a city council meeting where they don't make decisions, they just get information and kind of a pre-meeting. And there they talked about the possibility of making the library into the police facility, and they asked the staff, city staff, to come up with a proposal, how feasible it is to, essentially a feasibility study for a feasibility study, how feasible would it be to look into making the library into a police facility. Now, my suspicion, when I did that, I wrote a blog post about it. I also got a phone call from somebody, an avid library supporter, that said that the children's room remodeling at the library was being put on hold, a $300,000 project, all private funds, while the city was going through this process of trying to decide how feasible it was to make it into a police facility. So that got people fired up. I asked them to email their city councilors, and I'm sure many of them did. Because it was kind of a crazy idea. It was withdrawn. I wrote a blog post where I said my suspicion is that it would be, if it's withdrawn, the reason was that, well, seismic, we just discovered, an engineer told us that buildings built before a certain year is difficult to seismically upgrade, and then we didn't have the plans, we wouldn't know, how to do the seismic upgrades, because the police facility requires even higher seismic upgrades than
because you got people there 24/7.
Yeah, it has to be immediately available for use, whereas a regular building, the seismic standard is that you can get out safely. The building may be unusable, but it saves the people. So that was the reasoning of the mayor and the city manager, supposedly, was that the seismic thing.
Because the report wasn't released. So we're counting on what the mayor said the report said.
Well, there was a staff report that said, yeah, we recommend not going ahead with any feasibility study because blah, blah. Now, you'd think they could have just asked an engineer right at the beginning, just say, hey, Joe, what do you think about this idea? And he goes, that's crazy. And you don't even begin to get into it. My suspicion is that they found a face-saving way to duck out of this because they were getting so many cards and letters and emails from lovers of the library. They could see that this was a proposal that wasn't going anywhere, because you could perhaps come up with some arguments in favor of it, but it's one of these things that just is your first impression. Make the library into a police facility, do away with Laux Auditorium, do away with the children's room, put it, one suggestion, the Marion Parkade, the ground floor of a parking garage next to two busy streets. I mean, come on. Parents with children were not eager to see the library be moved to a ground floor of a parking garage.
Right, because you don't have a lot of traffic where the library is situated now. You go into the parking garage or wherever, and the kids are always wandering around.
Exactly. There's green spaces.
Right.
And, it's a pleasant building. I mean, one blogger, the Breakfast on Bikes blog, which is active and I often respect on urban design issues, calls it a concrete bunker, or use some other word. And,
I believe that bunker was the term that they were using.
Yeah, that's the way we built things back in the 70s. If it was painted, it would look different. But when I went down there and took photos of it, all the trees, the grass, I don't think it has, it's a library. A library has a different feel than a concrete bunker. It's a place when you go inside where there's books, and I've got loads of memories from moving here, and my daughter,
going to
the library from the 1977 on.
Well, that was one of the first things that I really fell in love with when I moved here to Salem, was the library, because it had a very large selection of books. And my wife used to tease me that we moved out of Bristol, Connecticut because I'd read all the books in the library, you know.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
And so this is a good library. It has good connections with other libraries. So if they don't have the book, I can get it easily. They have a nice selection of music and DVDs and other things too. And they have meetings there.
Oh, yes. Yeah, the meeting rooms are great. They're one of the free, free locations. Laux is also free. My wife had an event there showing a film, an environmental sort of film, and it was free, and they publicized it. They wanted to make the Laux Auditorium into a city council chambers and a court chambers, which would have essentially eliminated it as an auditorium. So that's gone. Anyway, that's the good news. I mean, the bad news is that they still are now back to the idea of putting the whole police facility at the Civic Center somewhere, and you can just use your brain and figure out if it's not the library and there's a city hall in the middle, then the only place left is where they originally wanted to put it, is next to and over Mirror Pond, a 3-story police palace, as I call it, with underground parking, which would make kind of like a tunnel effect on Commercial Street between the new redoing of the old Boise Cascade building, which will have condos on top, and then you'll have a 3-story police facility next to it is the idea. And Mirror Pond, which you now can see as you drive over Pringle Creek with the greenness and geese, would be essentially a drainage swale. So they're just utterly resistant to the idea of having a police facility anywhere else. And this is the strange thing. I mean,
well, yeah, because the mayor and Laura Tesler, one of the councilors, made it quite plain that they had made this decision already, and they were not going to go back on it, and they were going to find a place there. One of the things, too, that I heard was that they were thinking of taking the top off the atrium and building, more of a structure that way, which, I mean, you're still going to run into problems. You're still going to have to retrofit it. You're still going to have to do a lot of building. But, they never, it seems like they should have various options for us to be looking at. And what are the pros, what are the cons, how much it's going to cost to do these things, if they're going to have it on the City Hall campus. And if none of these are acceptable to the public, because the thing is that the public's going to have to vote for a bond measure to pay for all this.
right.
So the thing is that they can make these proposals and then put it up for election, as a bond measure. And if it doesn't pass, now they have to go back to step one and start all over again.
Right.
And in the meantime, the police department is in a substandard location.
Absolutely.
And it was interesting that I think it was on one of those blogs you were talking about that there's a major earthquake due within the next 50 or 100 years, and they were saying, well, that's only 1% a year. And I don't think that's correct. I think it's 50% every year. It's just that eventually that 50% hits. It's not like it's 1% a year. It can happen at any particular time. It can happen today.
Yes, the big subduction 9.0 earthquake eventually is going to happen. And once you realize that every time you go into the council chambers or you go into any brick building in Salem, really, I mean, it's on my mind. I've got a friend that every time he goes across one of the current bridges which need to be seismically retrofitted, he drives. He's usually a very slow driver, and he drives faster in order to get over it. Yeah, I think that's a little strange, but it is going to happen, and kids are going to be in the library, and people are going to be. So we know that in the Civic Center doing their business in City Hall. So we know the seismic upgrades are kind of a no-brainer. And we know they need a new facility, but the question is where? And Salem Community Vision, a group I've been involved with, has been looking at this. There's an architect and an engineer that have studied it, and they believe that the whole package, which the city is saying would be, say, $80 to $90 million, seismic upgrades, renovations to City Hall, and a new police facility, could be done for more like 40 to 50, say half price, which is a big deal, and it would vastly increase the chances of a bond measure passing. In Eugene, they didn't pass a bond measure, I believe, 3 or 4 times, and eventually the city found money that had been squirreled away, and they were able to build a $17 million police facility out of existing funds. But that probably isn't available to us here in Salem, even though there may be urban renewal funds available for a Marion Parkade police facility. If it was good enough for a library, you'd think, why isn't it good enough for a police facility? But like you say, from the beginning, in 2009 on, there was just a focus on the Civic Center. The mayor at the time, I believe it was Janet Taylor, and a few city councilors picked that place as where they wanted it. So I have another blog post where I looked and found the International Association of Police Chiefs have a model approach for planning a police facility. And it's essentially backwards from what the city did, whereas what you should be doing is selling the whole community on the need for a police facility first, showing how this is inadequate, how the space needs. Then you open up what kind of a new police facility do we need, and you talk about space and how many square feet. They've arrived at, say, 75,000 to 90,000 square feet. And then you talk about locations, and then you gradually build up instead, the city here essentially did it backwards. They quickly decided on the location. They then found what sort of police facility would fit there, or they did a space needs analysis. They may have done both of those simultaneously. So they came up with the size of the building and where it should go, and then tried to sell it to the community 3 years after they'd already made the decision. So like I like to say, this idea of reaching out to the community was reaching out with a plan in hand, which not surprisingly met with, hey, wait, why? We have different ideas. How about this? But they'd already made the decision. And now, even though they talked for a while about looking at other locations, like Portland Road, there's a willing seller and a willing neighborhood association and a willing community wanting a police facility there. You heard the mayor Monday night just goes, no, it has to be downtown for kind of not very good reasons.
Well, it's kind of interesting because they brought up that, it's central geographically in the city. The city hall is right now. And, I got talking to one of the city councilmen the following day, and he was saying, well, it's different from fire department because we got all these police cars out. We got 30 police cars out at all times. So they're like little substations all over the city. So it doesn't really matter where it is then.
No.
Because if you've got cars all over the place and you've got these substations all over the city, then it doesn't have to be right next to City Hall. And the fact is that I went and looked at Albany, which is quite a bit smaller, and their police department, the police facility, is almost 1.5 miles from City Hall.
Okay.
And now it's probably, and that's driving, okay, because there's railroad tracks, there's overpasses, so it's probably less than a mile as the crow flies, but they would have to go 1.45 miles to go back and forth between. But Albany, which is a smaller city than us, can do that.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to go through some of the other Oregon cities to see what they do, because I don't think that's essential. And like you were talking about Eugene, and I believe it was over a mile.
Oh, I think it's a couple miles
on the
other side of the river. They were able to find the existing office building that was already wired because I think it was a telecommunications company or something like that. Yeah, I mean, that was a sweet deal that they were able to remodel it. There may not be a building like that in Salem. But you're right. The one thing, whenever the police chief, Chief Moore, he says exactly what you said, that we have these rolling, essentially precincts out there. They're called police cars. And I'm no police expert, but I gather that when one is in South Salem, it doesn't come in and leave it unprotected, but probably they, pass each other or there's some changing of the guard.
Right.
And so this idea that everybody comes in all at once, all the police cars, then zoom, they go out like little bees out to the area. I don't think it's accurate because there is a police presence everywhere, somewhere in Salem at all times. Secondly, the mayor didn't talk about where that may be the geographic center of Salem, but I seriously doubt whether downtown is the geographic center of crime and of needs for police in Salem. I would guess that north and east have higher crime rates than south and west Salem. Now that's just a guess based on socioeconomics, but that's another reason not to. And then third is just the fact that, there's plenty of buildings, public works, that are just scattered all over Salem where somehow people are able to do
their job.
Do their job and do their business. When I get have to go and file something for my neighborhood group, I'm the secretary, and I've been going, before Courthouse Square was remodeled, I was going down on Front Street and going into a building there, and the county offices were scattered all over the place, and somehow they functioned for several years. This idea that all of city government has to be together, and that it's better to have them together and to save a few little gas money than it is to save the citizens $64 million in capital and bond costs in order to have a more efficient and lower cost police facility. It seems crazy to me. They've never shown how this little efficiency of having the police chief and staff able to walk next door and talk to the mayor outweighs saving tens of millions of dollars by having them on a much lower cost surface property where they could have surface parking, rather than very expensive underground parking at the Civic
Right.
Center.
And you would still have a situation where your police vehicles then are somewhat in danger if they're parking underground. They can be easily blocked off.
True.
And
You'd
like
think
that.
so.
The other thing too is kind of unique about Salem, since it's the capital, it's also where a lot of the county offices are, as well as the city offices. There's not a lot of options necessarily downtown, because a lot of it's taken up with state and county as well as city offices.
Right.
So you need to be thinking about where things are. And it's interesting too about the police cars is that the yard where they get serviced is down on Mission, and I think it's 21st. It's down in that area.
I think you're right.
So that's a couple of miles from downtown where the cars have to go to get serviced.
Yes. Yeah, that's a possibility for a location. Yeah, the basic theme, that I said, one of my basic themes when I made my public comment on this and kind of raised the mayor's, I guess ire would be one way to put it, or at least attention, was just because there was this talk with Councilor Bednar's, one of his favorite sayings now is thinking outside the box, or this is what many councilors, now of course you can think outside the box and it can be a crazy idea, or you can think outside the box.
You're still
and be a
inside the
good
box
idea.
though.
We're all inside some sort of a box, yeah. And I said, yeah, you're thinking outside the box thinking, wow, we can make the library into a police facility. That's wonderfully creative and innovative, but then you are restricted your thinking about where a police facility could go to this box of the Civic Center, and which really only has one little spot left on it where a police facility should go once you've illuminated the library, and you refuse to think outside of that box.
Right.
And to me, that's where the creativity would come in. I mean, so I was talking with somebody only yesterday that I thought this was a creative idea. So how about moving the entire Civic Center, other than the library, somewhere else, City Hall, like the North Campus has come up with an idea, the old state hospital grounds, which are slated for renovation. Use some of those old buildings, take City Hall and the police facility, put it on the North Campus, and then remodel City Hall into essentially what's being done to the Boise Cascade building. That concrete bunker, they're taking that big concrete bunker that was the Boise Cascade warehouse, tearing it down. They're going to put condos on the top. They're going to put parking, I think, underneath, and they're going to have I believe, some retail, on the ground floor. You're saying, why not do that? Have condos on the top, have a view of the river, have some mixed-use offices, in the middle, and then have some retail space down below, which would draw people to that part of downtown. Because why should one of the best, parts of downtown, riverfront downtown property, be used for government offices that could be anywhere? So that kind of flips the argument that should be downtown. I said, I mean, I don't know if that's a feasible, but at least it's a creative idea. And yet this blue ribbon task force, which seems like an archaic thing, I don't know what blue ribbon means. I mean, to me, it conjures up Chamber of Commerce, moneyed people, bank presidents and whatnot, they're going to get together, be appointed by the mayor, essentially to rubber stamp and refine the idea that the city has already decided on.
Right. Well, I mean, she's insisting that it has to be on the City Hall campus.
Right.
And so anybody that is in agreement with that is not going to be appointed to this.
I doubt it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned Blue Ribbon, because I always think of Pabst Blue Ribbon beer, but I mean that's.
Okay.
But I mean the thing is that it's not going to include people that I think you need to have on a commission to make this kind of decision, because you need to look at different things. I mean. To me, what they're going to end up with is there's not going to be any solution on that City Hall campus that's going to pass muster with the voters, because it's going to be too expensive. So they'll keep putting this decision off over and over again until, like maybe Eugene, where they're forced to look elsewhere because there aren't any good solutions there.
Yeah. Or, find a pot of money that doesn't require voter approval. Well, this is when I told the mayor, I said, look, if you have a bottom-up approach with at least the semblance, if not the actuality of the idea springing up from the community and meeting broad community acceptance, then it has a much better chance of passing, because you're going to have people all rooting for it to pass. But the way you're doing it now, I mean, I think politically these people are just kind of brain dead comes to mind, but clueless maybe is a better term, because I think politically it's just, as I've explained to people, to me it's like what they do is they put up a block, they have a way, and then if you say something different, they go, no, we can't do that. Now, if anybody that watches House of Cards like I do knows that, I mean, the smart thing to do is that you just bend, that you guide people into what you want them to do without them even knowing, like a good salesman does. You don't even know you're being sold. You think you're getting your way, and they get their way. But that doesn't happen with the city. They'll say, like, we want downtown parking meters. And then the people go, no, we're not. We're going to get 9,000 people to sign the petition not to have parking meters. And that gets stopped. Or we want a third bridge, and then you can bet that there's not going to be a third bridge. Or we want the police facility, the civic center, and the people are going to say no. I mean, the smart thing would be to draw in the opposition, and find ways, to manipulate this into a way where they would get what they want. But instead, it's a strange feeling down at City Council. It's like they want this, you say something different, and they just go, no, sit down and shut up, even though they're not quite that impolite.
Yeah, well, I worked in private industry for a long time, and one of the things that I would always impress upon management is you need the people that do the day-to-day job to feel like they're part of the decision-making process so that they buy into this new process that you're trying to implement. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you get resistance. People don't want to change when it's being forced on them, when they have no say about how things are going to be done. Not to mention the fact that I've seen a lot of times where management makes really dumb decisions, and then it becomes quite obvious that it's not going to work, that it costs a lot of money to do it, because you never asked anybody else that does the day-to-day job
right.
how to make this work.
Right. Yeah, well, the feeling that I have is at the meeting and generally about the city council is that they have a private sector mentality, like we're the CEOs. Over and over again, right. The mayor and others said, we're the decision makers. We're hired or elected, essentially, to make decisions. But the problem is, I mean, there's a couple of problems with that argument. One, it doesn't even work in corporate America right. anymore, because they know there's a tendency toward leveling and toward, groups working together and to doing away with hierarchies, and so you have more creativity, even in the private sector where it's their own money or shareholder money that you're dealing with. But here we have a group of people down at City Hall, they're trying to pretend they're corporate CEOs, and they're using the taxpayers' money. It's not their money. And so that's the thing that I think makes government into a whole different animal than the private sector, even though there's some commonalities. That here, and not only is it not your money, there isn't even the money to begin with. You're going to have to ask the public for the bond measure to pass in order to get this to happen. And yet you're trying to say, we're going to be the decision makers, just shut up, we're going to do it this way, don't. And you go, well, that's just stupid, because once you go out there, I mean, I can argue and others can argue that you never gave the public a chance to weigh in on this plan, so why should you vote for it now? I mean, it's just kind of very easy to argue against it when there's been such lack of community involvement.
And the community is going to get the vote on this eventually.
Almost certainly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's not like a corporate atmosphere where, the board of directors is basically appointed.
Right.
You're going to have people voting on this, so you need to make sure that they're included in the decision-making process, or you're not going to get it to pass.
Right. Well, politically, it's a really tough thing, because you get a kind of a strange, and it's not so strange, coalition of two ends of the political spectrum. You get the conservative, let's call them Tea Party types. They're anti-government. They're all right. Suspicious of wasteful government spending. They're going to say, why the heck, maybe we don't even need a police facility. Why can't they just make do with what they have, or just lease some space somewhere? So those people are going to vote no. Then you have the liberals that are very suspicious of this city government, because this city government is essentially a kind of a big spending Republican type of people. They are conservative, but they like to spend $500 million on a new bridge. They want to spend $140 billion on a new police facility. So it isn't like the fiscally conservative types of conservatives. It's a big spend, but do it our way sorts of Republicans. So that's ticking off the Republicans, I mean the liberals and the progressives. And in the middle, there's just not that many people left to vote for it. So yeah, it's going to be a very difficult process, even if the whole community was working together, the activists, to make this pass. And when you've ticked off both ends of the political spectrum, then it's even worse. So
yeah, and like the police chief was saying, you need to go out and show the community why it's needed.
Yes. And
they haven't done that part. And also, I would, this is my personal opinion, but I'd also blame the Statesman Journal, because they do not cover these issues very well. And in fact, a lot of times they don't cover them at all, or they do it kind of later on in the process.
Yes.
So the city council and the mayor need to get out in front and make sure that this information gets out. Otherwise, they're going to keep running into this problem, as
Right.
they did with the downtown parking and as they've had with the third bridge.
Yes, right. Yeah, there should be analytic pieces in the Salem Journal, investigative reporting, that are very rarely do they interview opponents. Usually they go and get a quote or two from a city council member, but the people that are, on the other side or have a different opinions usually don't get a say. And you could easily see, two visions of the new police facility. Interview Jeff James and Gene Pfeiffer from Salem Community Vision, see why they believe, that ground level parking and why you could take an existing lot. There have been plans, schematics I've seen for the Portland Road site. You use, 4 or 5 acres of that. There's plenty of land left over for other purposes. It would kind of jumpstart the Portland Road, which is location, which is why the neighborhood association
Wants something
passed a
out there.
resolution they want out there, because right now it's
Yeah.
just empty. And
And the
yeah,
North
this
Campus
the
is
thing.
another place that they should be looking at as well.
Well, yeah, that's a possibility. I don't know whether there's plenty of old buildings out there. Whether they can be retrofitted, is another question. But it's this idea that they had plenty of money. They claimed at 30 different sites for a police facility, and yet they did it in a blink of an eye. And I've looked at those. That report. And it obviously isn't an in-depth thing. And also, you and I know the feature of motivated reasoning. That once you made a decision, you've been going down this road for 3 years, and then you suddenly think, oh, we better look at some other sites so we can show people that we've, looked at other alternatives. Then there's like a cursory look at
Yeah.
this, just to say, well, look, we did it. We looked at other sites. We found the footprint. Amazingly, all the sites turned out to be just almost as expensive as the one they picked, and it was done by the same consultant, which was getting paid to plan the original Civic Center site. So what are the chances that a consultant you've hired and are paying well to do work for you is going to come up with a recommendation to say, no, we got to start over and do something else? I mean, come on.
It's not going to happen.
No, it was just, like you said, it was just for show. So,
Well, so part of the problem then is the environment down there at City Hall, I would say. The chamber picked candidates, and 3 of the 4 in this last election got voted in. And so the dynamic is going to be pretty much the same going forward, unless Tom Anderson can really stand up to these folks and make them kind of see things differently. I mean, to me, that's going to be kind of the big question going forward in the future. Plus, then we need to think about the even-numbered council races that are going to be coming up in 2016. We need to start thinking about those now if we want to change that dynamic.
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the mayor is elected, I believe, every 2 years, so there's
Right.
always, second chance on that. You chip away, you get one good council member, at a time, and it makes a difference. And there's also ideas that you just, like the internet, interpret censorship as you just route around it. I mean, there's ways to involve the public, because the public does have to weigh in on these things. And, if we get them involved and fired up, we can make some changes.
Well, Brian, I want to thank you for coming down and sharing your thoughts with
Well,
us.
thank you.
And
Pleasure.
we'll have to have you come back because this seems to be a reoccurring theme, and I'm sure it's going to come up again. So I want to thank you for watching Valley View this week, and come back next week.